We're going to keep digging into this book of Colossians, this ancient letter. And you got to think about that. As we're going through each Sunday, we take just a few verses. So we have these books that we broke down into chapters, and in the chapters are smaller verses, usually a sentence or so long or part of a sentence. And today, for instance, we're going to look at 4 verses in the book of Colossians, just 4 verses. But when Colossians was sent, it was a letter. Okay? It would be like if you got a text message right now, and there were 3 emojis at the top and then a paragraph of text. You wouldn't look at just the emojis and then go, I'll look at the rest of it later. You would read the text message, right? That's what you would do. If you got a letter now and it was from this long-lost friend that you haven't heard from years, you get it, you see who it's from, you open it up, and it says, "Dear," insert your name here, right? And then you go, that was great, I'll read the rest of that later. You would read the letter, and you would read it in its entirety. So we're a little distanced from this because we don't read it the way it was originally written. It was written as this just one fell swoop. Read this letter. This is what Paul wanted these early Christians to know. The Apostle Paul was a thought leader, pastor, elder in the early church shortly after Jesus lived and walked on the earth, shortly after his death, burial, and resurrection and ascension to heaven. Paul is on the scene, and he's teaching. He's leading, and he talks to the Colossians, and so we've walked through this. We've walked through the first 2 chapters of this 4-chapter book. And these chapters, we see that Jesus is supreme. That's what Paul is concerned about. And that if Jesus is supreme, we need to walk ourselves, we need to live our lives that kind of reflect that. That he is supreme, preeminent, most important, of first order. That's how I should live. But then we also spent time, and we looked at the fact that if Jesus is supreme and I'm trying to walk my life around him, I have to actually find life itself in him, that I'm empowered and enlivened by him with the knowledge of what we looked at last week, which is that we can literally stand before God, before Jesus, before the Father, in the presence of the holy divine Trinity, creator and author of the universe, holy and majestic, splendorous without any defect at all. And we can still stand in front of him. Not because of how awesome we are, but because of how amazingly supreme Jesus is, and that he takes all of himself, all of his goodness and his righteousness, and he places it on us if we will accept it. And God sees the glory and the beauty of his son when he looks at us. It says that in the Bible that Jesus' righteousness, all his right relationships and right standing, that is imputed to those, it is given over to those who are sinful and messed up. Which, if you are confused, that's all of us, okay? We're sinful, we're messed up, we make mistakes. Some of us more than others, I'll admit, right? But we're all broken and needing of saving in one degree or another. And Jesus doesn't go, well, I guess you're close enough to good, so I'll. Jesus looks at us and says, I see the beauty in which I designed you, and I will honor and lift that up. Here, bear my goodness, and that's all my dad's going to see when he looks at you. That's what we have. That's how we're qualified. And then we get to where we're at today. It's all this walk through this book of Colossians, which I've added the tagline for us. This is about the ultimate, complete, amazing supremacy of Jesus. You know I hoot and holler when it comes to certain things that get me excited. One of them is this word gospel. What does gospel mean, church? Good news! Good news! Good news. But the good news is good because the one about whom the news is good. The good news is only good because of how good Jesus is. That's what we look at. We look at Jesus. I get hype about the gospel because it's really all about Jesus. And if we somehow make our religion about rules, if we somehow make our faith about checking all the right boxes, about supporting all the right policies, all that stuff, we have utterly missed the heart of what Jesus came to do. Jesus came to do a renovation of the heart. There's actually a book by that title by a guy named Dallas Willard, who the whole point of Jesus coming was not to set up this perfect systematized religion, but to renovate our hearts, to take what the Old Testament tells us in prophecy, our hearts of stone, to surgically remove those and replace them with a heart of flesh. This is what Jesus came to do. Jesus is supreme, and in doing that, he changes everything about me. And what we're going to do is look at what does that kind of mean now? If Jesus is supreme, and I'm trying to live my life in accordance with that, and if I then kind of get my motivation and my excellence, my life through that, and I recognize that I'm qualified to even talk to God, all because of Jesus, if all that stuff is true, we're going to look at just a few verses and understand that I, like Jesus, am raised to new life. And that matters. But it's not just this passive thing that has happened to me. It should be an active thing that I participate in. And we're going to look at that. But there's an author. It's the president and CEO, I believe currently, of an organization called Desiring God. And he wrote this kind of looking at God's glory. What he wrote was, we want the credit, the appreciation, the praise for any good we've done, and pity and understanding for whatever we've done wrong. Does that sound familiar to anybody? We like being told we've been done a good job, but if we ever screw up, we want people to be real nice and gentle and real gracious, right? It says, we were made to make much of him, of God, but we demand instead that he, God, make much of us. That is, if we think much of God at all. Now look at this. One of the most staggering and scandalous claims of Christianity is that God not only loves shameful, undeserving sinners, but shares his glory with them. He not only allows them to live in his presence, he makes them like his son. This is amazing, right? This truth that the Bible teaches is not just that God sees us along the side of the road. You know, we've been taken over by robbers, beat up and whatnot. And he's like, you know what? I'll give you a $5 so that you can get yourself some Band-Aids. He's not looking at us like, okay, I guess you can come over and, clean yourself up a bit. He's not like, you know what? I guess you can stay for dinner, but then you better get moving. It's not even that he says, okay, you can stay with me. You can live in my house. You can eat my food. It's not even just that. He looks at us, and if we accept the forgiveness of Jesus, on the basis of Jesus, through Jesus, in faith in Jesus, then he looks at us and he says, my son, my daughter. We are welcomed into his family like Jesus himself. We share in, we participate in his own glory. And that changes everything. And we're going to see by the end, hopefully, what that means for us, what that looks like. But let's see if we can blaze through 4 verses yet this morning. And again, I'm going to apologize. Like I shared, we did the Switch with Fun Day. And sometimes, I've been known to preach a little long. I apologize. That my intent is not to make you sit here longer than you should. But believe it or not, the longer I have to prepare a message, the shorter it gets, because I can figure out what all to cut out. So I'm going to try real hard, but I only had a couple days. So if I get too boring, we've removed the hymnals from the chair, so there's no sharp hard covers, but there are the soft-covered Bibles. You can feel free to start threatening me with one of them, all right? What we're going to do is we're going to look at Colossians chapter 3. If you've got your Bibles, turn there. We're going to start right at verse 1. Here's what we read in Colossians 3, starting in verse 1. If then, and by the way, this is a rhetorical statement. He's saying, this is true for you, those who follow Jesus. If then you have been raised with Christ. This is the kind of crowning phrase for all 4 verses. This is the umbrella under which everything we're looking at falls, is this idea of being raised with Christ. See, the story of Jesus was that he was fully God and fully man, 100%. He lived, though he was human, a perfect life, never sinned in thought, deed, action, emotion, anything. There's no sin whatsoever. And yet, after a life of loving and serving others and living perfectly, he was wrongly convicted and murdered. He was tortured and executed on a brutal execution device known as the Roman crucifix. It's actually where we get the word excruciating when it comes to pain, because not only did it kill you, it tortured you in the most horrific ways. So Jesus bore that, though he didn't deserve it, and he died, and then, by the power of God, he rose victorious over sin, death, and the grave. You see, the Bible tells us that all of us, yes, are sinners, and that sin earns us death. But since Jesus wasn't a sinner, never sinned, he didn't earn death, but he paid a death. And since he did that as a human, but since he's God and divine and infinite, he, as infinite God, can take that singular payment of his death and apply it to all of the rest of us finite beings, if only we will accept it. This is the gospel. This is the good news. And if we accept it, if we accept Christ's payment, if we accept his forgiveness, and when he says, if you want my forgiveness, you got to follow me. Turn from your sin and follow me. If we will say, all right, Jesus, you get to be the boss. You've paid off my mortgage. You get to tell me what color to paint the walls, all right? If that's the case, then it says that we participate in his very resurrection from the dead. When it says, if you have been raised with Christ, that is those who have chosen to follow Jesus in obedience, who have accepted his gift of salvation, of forgiveness, and now live in a resurrected state with God. It says, if that's you, and that's a device saying, yes, in Paul's mind, that's who he's talking to. This, if you are truly a Christian, not somebody who shows up at a church occasionally, or, hey, my parents did this, but you've actually chosen to follow Jesus and accept his forgiveness, then you should do some things. There are things that are associated not to get in with God, but a result of being part of God's family, right? My kids didn't have to do anything to be part of my family. You know, they were born into it. Now that they're part of the family, they can't earn their way in and they can't earn their way out. But let me tell you, if you're part of our family, there's some expectations, right? Don't ask my son. He says I have too many, okay? Yeah, okay, he's nodding vigorously. But when you're part of a family, there's expectations because that's how the family works. Well, if we're part of God's family, what does he expect? Look at this first word that's underlined, seek. And we're going to look, hopefully quickly, at some of these Greek terms, because the New Testament was written primarily in a form of Greek called Koine Greek. It was a conversational Greek between modern Greek and ancient Greek. And it brought in some Roman ideas and some other pagan and Jewish ideas as well. But this form of Greek was what it was written in. And sometimes we miss the meaning in our English translations because you have to kind of interpret as you translate. We talked about that a little bit last week. But this word here, seek, I don't know about you, but whenever I think of seek, I think of like hide and seek, right? That's where my brain goes. As a kid, you played hide and seek. So somebody hid, and the objective of the game was to look around until you found them. But it almost makes it trivial, if that's all it is. This word is zeito, and it carries the idea of longing for, of desiring. But it's not just an emotional state, although it is a very emotional word. It's a word that's connected to emotion in that it is an action word that is motivated by emotion. So the sense is that this is an active pursuit of something driven by an internal desire for that thing. So seek is not like, oh, well, I'm playing Go Fish and I need some threes. So I'm seeking for threes. Hey, got any threes? Hey, got any threes? That's kind of casual and flippant, not really engaged in it. This seeking is like, man, you just found your perfect other, okay? If you're single, maybe you're in the process of that. If you're married, you can think back to that. I've been looking for my perfect person for years. Oh, I found him. Now I'm going to get him. Again, not in a creepy way. That's not what I'm saying. But the idea that I'm going to work, I am going to pursue. I'm going to make sure I smell right. I'm going to make sure I dress right. I say nice things. I get gifts. I am going to pursue that. I need to get it because my heart is wrapped up in this. That's what this term seek means. It is an emotionally invested word that results in action of pursuit. And what is it? It says, seek the things that are above. And this is where the The English language sometimes falls short because what you actually see, if you go back here to seek, this is zeeto. It's actually zeeto ano. 2 words for 6 English words. It's seek upward. That's what the Greek phrase says. And this word upward, ano, has the idea of the abode, the place, the presence of God. It was kind of a way of, when it's used in these kind of contexts, of saying there's a place that is above the common. There's a place that is beyond just the stuff that you walk through every day. And that is where God dwells. That is where God's presence is manifested. So what Paul is saying is if you've been raised with Christ, if you're participating in his resurrection, if you have life eternal, you should be emotionally pursuing God's presence in your life. Not just, oh, hey, yeah, it's cool. I've been forgiven. It's like really rocking fire insurance. I'm done. I'm good. I can go about my other stuff. But actually, in light of that, that should produce a desire in my heart that affects my behaviors to get more of this thing that has saved me, this more of Jesus. And it says, where the things are that are above, where Christ is seated at the right hand of God. Especially in some of these cultures of antiquity, the right hand was a picture and a symbol of authority, of an extension of a ruler or someone who had great glory or might or strength. So to say that Christ was seated at the right hand of God, we tend to think of seated as like what you guys are doing right now. Like not very participatory, right? You're just kind of sitting there and stuff's coming in. But this idea of seated at the right hand of God, it's actually a very active phrase. It's one that it talks about the position of the person, meaning that this person bears the authority of the one they're sitting beside. So it was really a picture of a crown, of a throne. So your king's there wearing the crown, sitting on the throne, and at his right hand is his number 1. Do I have any Star Trek The Next Generation fans in here? 2. Awesome. So if you know anything about that, when Captain Picard talks to his first officer, what does he call him? Number 1. Number 1, I need you to, and what would happen is Riker, number 1, his first officer, would go and accomplish whatever the captain needed to happen. And so Riker served in the authority, but in the place of that one. Actually, you're carrying on the very authority, the very persona of the one you represent. There's a unification between the two, and that's where Jesus is. He is the one who executes the vision of God. So he says that is what we should seek, things that are upward, things that are of the place, the dwelling, the purpose, and the authority of God. So verse 2, it looks very similar to us. It says, set your minds on things above. Okay, you see those both? It's very similar. But this set your minds, and that above is the exact same word that we saw in verse 1. But this set your mind, it's a little bit different than seek. It's phroneo. And phroneo is much more of an intellectual word. Whereas the seek, that word was much more of an emotional, meaning you have to be desirous about it, and out of that desire pursued for the fulfillment of your desire. This phroneo, this set your minds, is think about. Again, set your mind on, form an opinion or ponder are the ways that this is translated. The sense here is to build up a plausible, reasonable, accurate belief on a subject matter on hand based upon legitimate, observable phenomenon. It's that you can see something and it makes sense and you work to form your opinion around it based upon the facts of that thing. But at the same time, it's the idea of pursuing it, of making that integrate with your life. So it's not just, yes, I believe that exercise is a healthy option. That is a true statement. I have thought about it. Now, guess what? I get zero benefit from thinking about it until I what? Do it. And that's what this set your mind. The the way this word is constructed, and this is the structure, it's actually what's considered a chiastic structure from seek the things and set your minds. It's a way of writing antiquity which says these things are following a parallel course. So since we know that seek the things is about emotionally driven pursuit of, this is intellectual pursuit of. So with all your heart, with all your mind, pursue the things that are above, the things that are in relation to God. That's what we were designed for. And if we've been raised to life, if we've been forgiven our sins, that's what our family does. Our family seeks with all our hearts, with all our minds, to pursue these things, to do these things. And the thing is, it's not just the good that we pursue, there are also things that we should not do, and those are the things on the earth. Now, this is one where we have to be careful. Some people who choose to follow Jesus, or who say they follow Jesus, think that anything that isn't church-related is evil, bad, dirty, nasty, scary, right, unholy. And so unless something has like the word Christian stamped in front of it, oh, you shouldn't do that. That's worldly. Icky. Don't do that. Now here's the problem. That's not what the Bible tells us to do. That's not what Jesus did. That's not what God has revealed for us to do. Yes, we need to be discerning. There are certain things in life that you cannot redeem. Okay? I've shared this story before, but there was a church down in Florida that tried a new ministry in one of those strip malls, right? And it was pole dancing worship. And it was an exercise plan for this church where they would say, hey, we have the poles, we have the rhythmic music, and we will do all the same physical activity that goes with that activity, but we do it to worship music, and we say we're worshiping Jesus with it. And I'll tell you, it came from a good heart. This was a church that was saying, you know what, we got people that are far from Jesus, and maybe they'll come if we do something that they're familiar with. But I want to tell you that the things that were involved with that was something that can't be redeemed. You can't go, well, I did slap the word Christian in front of it, so now it's good and healthy and right. But we have to also not say, unless it has Christian in front of it, I can't do it. I just this week had a doctor take a shot, a needle, that had steroids in it. And they jammed it into my spinal column and shot stuff in, trying to fix the things that are going on. And I hope you know that I'm really sold out to Jesus. I love Jesus because he first loved me. My life is so much about Jesus. My kids will even, they've learned, Daddy, who do you love the most? And if I screw up and say, Mommy, they say, no, you don't. You love Jesus more. I'm like, yeah, you're right, buddy. Okay? Okay, that one in particular catches me on that. It's great. Okay? So I am all about Jesus. But do you know what I didn't ask when I was getting the stuff done for my back? Is the doctor a Christian? Oh, if they don't follow Jesus, then I can't do that. That's not what this is about. This is not about saying that everything must be this weird Christian subculture and that anything that somehow is connected to the world is wrong. Quite frankly, God says that he sends his blessing, the good, on the righteous and the unrighteous the same. And in fact, when God took his people out of Egypt, when he rescued ancient Israel, and the Israelites fled into the wilderness where God was rescuing them from hundreds of years of oppression, it says that they literally spoiled the Egyptians, that they took all their stuff with them, their gold and their food and all this stuff, and things that actually would have been used in cultic worship in Egypt, the Israelite people took, and they said, you know what, nope, we're using this for the real deal. We're using this to serve God. So it's not about saying everything that has anything to do with the world or the physical body is bad, but it's saying your allegiance cannot be to a place that is outside of where God's presence is. That is the differentiation here. We are supposed to seek the things that are above, where Christ is seated at the right hand of God. We're supposed to set our minds on those things. That is where our allegiance goes. That is where our motivation goes. That's where our fulfillment goes. We do not get, if we're following Jesus, our energy, our motivation, we do not give our allegiance, our loyalty to a place that is not where God is, which means there are times that things in this world you will have to say no to when they don't align with what God says. But that doesn't mean that just because something happens in our world Because it's both things. It's a balance here. Just because it's something that's in the world doesn't mean that you have to outright reject it. But I'm telling you, we're coming up into a pretty crazy time in our country. It happens on a somewhat predictable cycle. I'd suggest about every 4 years or so, we run in to one of these cycles. The Olympics, exactly. We get very invested in the Olympics. But there's going to be a lot of tension. There's going to be a lot of arguing, even amongst us as a church family. And the thing is, we cannot set our loyalty, our allegiance to the systems of this world above our loyalty to Jesus. Jesus Christ is King. He is Lord of all creation. He deserves our worship and our allegiance, and that's where we're going to push. Now, we can wonderfully, heartily debate and engage, and in fact, I'm doing one of those things they tell pastors not to do, and that is we're going to be doing a sermon series where we talk about a whole bunch of things that you're not supposed to talk about in church, right? We're going to try that, and I'm going to make sure there's no sharp, pointy things in the back of the chairs, all right? We're really going to work on that, but we're going to take several weeks looking at that. We're going to talk about politics in a church. I ain't going to be telling you how to vote. I'm not going to tell you how to vote, but we are going to talk about the fact that you have to have your mind set on the things above. You have to seek with your heart the things that are above and not the things on the earth. And quite frankly, for all of us, this means that a Jesus-centered life, living a Jesus-centered life requires intentional, mindful, and ongoing pursuit of Him. It does not happen by accident. It absolutely does not. Being a Jesus follower is not an accidental thing that you just slip into. Where one day you're like, oh, hey, I've been following Jesus this whole time. Never knew. It's not going to happen. And it's not going to happen simply by claiming it. Okay? Does anybody here watch The Office? Has anybody ever seen that? It was a British show that got remade as an American show with, what's his name? Steve Farrell, okay? Steve Carell, not Steve Farrell, yeah, Steve Carell, okay. Steve Carell. And there's one scene where he's having horrible money problems, and they say something about, well, you could declare bankruptcy, and he thought that would solve his problem. So he bursts into a room and goes, I declare bankruptcy! And he thought all his problems were gone because he declared it. Guess what? That does not work. That is really bad fiscal advice. Don't do that. But secondly, that doesn't work for being a Jesus follower. You can't declare, oh yeah, I'm a Christian. Oh yeah, I follow Jesus. Oh yeah, I'm trying to live a Jesus-centered life. You can't just say it and not pursue it. You have to seek it. You have to set your mind on it. It requires intentional, meaning purposeful. You're trying, mindful, meaning it's considered. It's not just happenstance. Like, well, I tried, but you actually gave thought to it. And it's not just, well, I did it once in 1974. Why do you expect me to do it again? It is ongoing. It's perpetuating. This is the Jesus-centered life. And it happens not out of obligation. It doesn't happen out of some vain and furied and frenzied pursuit to somehow get on God's good side. It's saying, Jesus, you've done everything. You love me so deeply, so intently, so fully, so completely. Man, I want everybody to know. I'm so thankful. And, by the way, when we actually get to November, I'm giving you some sneak previews here. We're going to spend 3 or 4 weeks talking about just that. What does it mean to live a life of gratitude to Jesus? Because that changes it. We don't do it to get in. We do it as a response to all the good He's already done. It requires personal effort to come after Jesus. It will not happen because you're just in a church building. It will not happen just because your family are Christians or believers. It requires personal, intentional, mindful, ongoing pursuit of Him. But that's just the first 2 verses of today. Let's take a look at the last 2. They're a little shorter, so maybe we'll breeze through them. Verse 3, he says, for you have died. Again, we're a room of zombies, apparently. No. This idea is talking about we have participated with Christ in death to sin. See, Jesus died to pay the debt of sin. And in that Jesus died for our sins, He paid that debt. We no longer have to die. So we are now dead to the world system, to the requirements of what sin said that we legally owed. It says, for the wages of sin is death. What sin earns is death. That's been paid. I have died to that. It says that your life, and actually this word die is really interesting. It's actually, it can mean just to die, but it often means to drown in a large amount of water. It's like a specific way of death. So that in Christ, there's this like drowning. Remember, we've talked about baptism before. And the idea that baptism talks about dying to old self, going under the water in that, and being risen to new life. If any of you are at that point where you have not followed the Lord in obedience with baptism, if you've accepted Christ's gift of forgiveness, the last week of this month, May 26th, we are doing a baptism service right in here, right over there, and it would be an honor to help you follow the Lord in obedience when it comes to baptism. But this word died, it's actually in the Greek, it's got a tense called the aorist. We don't have an aorist tense in the English. This word talks about something that has happened at some point. It's not really worried too much about the time. It's worried about the fact that it has already happened, but it has ongoing repercussions today. That's what this word means. Like, yeah, you died, but you're almost dying now. It's in the indicative mood, and the indicative mood is one which talks about ongoing action. It's continual. It's not just something that you casually did here or there. The context here is this happened, but it's kind of still happening, and it actually is in the active voice rather than passive, because so often with words like death or died or those things, it's in the passive voice, meaning that this was something that happened to an individual, to the subject. This is active, meaning that somehow we're participating in it. So what is this participation? Well, he says, if this has happened, if this is where you're at, if you're dead to sin and dying to sin and participating in that death to sin, your life, therefore, and the word life here is zoe. I know I'm throwing a lot of Greek words at you. Feel free to just, slide them to the side if those are confusing, okay? You don't have to memorize them. No one's going to be super impressed at lunch if you remember them all. But there is, I think, importance here, because that word life, we tend to think of the Greek word bios, where we get the word biology. Bios refers to the physicality of living. Like, does that thing have brain activity? Does that thing, does its lungs work and move air in and out? Is the circulatory system pumping? That's biology. That's bios. This is zoe. And zoe is the essence of a living thing. It includes bios. And for something to truly have zoe here and now, it also has bios. But it's the deep, rich, whole personness of any living being. So the essence of your life, it says, is hidden. It is concealed. And this Greek word is one many of you probably have heard. Have everybody heard of cryptocurrency? It's from this word. It is literally the Greek word crypto. And it means to hide, to conceal, keep secret, or keep safe. It's usually attributed to things that were of value or of some level of importance that you couldn't just have lying out, sitting out for anyone to take or utilize. So if you're in this death to sin and all that stuff, if you've participated in it with Jesus and you're ongoing, your very essence is being kept safe with Christ in God, with our Messiah, with the King. And this King isn't done. Jesus isn't done. Because it says when Christ, who is your life, your zoe, your essence, the trueness of who you are. At the end of all things, if you've died to all that junk, you now live in Christ, and he is the essence. When he appears, phronero, to reveal, to make clear, to make known. It is to demonstrate the true nature of something, is what this Greek word means. Now, we, as a kind of a tribe of believers, of Christians, we believe that theologically we look forward to the ultimate fulfillment of Jesus appearing. What this verse says, when Christ, who is your life, appears, we say that will ultimately be fulfilled at what's called the second coming, when Christ returns in full and total and absolute victory over sin, death, and the grave. He's already earned it and offers it. At the end, he will culminate and fulfill all last vestiges of it. All sin will be wiped away. All death will be eliminated. There will be no more suffering, no more crying, no more tears. All things will be made new, will be reborn into new heavens and new earth. And the second coming of Jesus will usher all this in. That is the ultimate fulfillment. But there's also a very practical, current view of this. See, because practically, Christ appears whenever we live in a way that manifests or demonstrates him. See, that word appear means to demonstrate, to manifest, and Jesus is the image of the invisible God. He is the exact imprint of God's nature. We looked at that in the supremacy of Christ in chapter 1. Jesus is the picture of God, and in that, he demonstrates God in all of who he is. When we, like Jesus, when we reflect him, when we live in a way that demonstrates his life, we are manifesting Christ in our world. It says, when that happens, we will also appear with him in glory. And this is one of the most mysterious and actually debated phrases in Scripture. You've had very smart people for 2,000 years arguing over what exactly does this mean to appear with him in glory. Because it's not simply a spatial thing. Like, you will be literally located and there will be some like aura or glow of glory, and you will be geographically positioned within that. It's not just that. It's deeper, it's richer, and we're trying to figure it all out, but we know this, that it is good. It is good to behold the glory of God. And here we are told that we will appear with him. We will manifest with him. I want to share just a couple verses from 2 Peter. Don't bother turning there because we're just about done. But here Peter is writing to early Jewish followers of Jesus. They were dispersed amongst all these different Greek states and towns, and he was trying to give them a sense of, hey, you followed Judaism, now you're following Jesus. Let me give you a sense to what do you do in this life now? Because things were very confusing. And what he says in his second letter, he says, his divine power, Jesus' divine power, has granted to us all things that pertain to life and godliness through the knowledge of him who called us to his own glory and excellence, by which he granted to us his precious and very great promises. Catch this, so that you may become partakers of the divine nature. What the Bible teaches us in a way that, in many ways, defines or defies our description, our understanding, that we share in God's glory through Jesus. If we've been raised with Jesus, we share in his glory. If we've been raised with Jesus, we partake in the divine nature. The early church fathers called it the process of deification. But that word kind of took on some other meanings, and people got scared of it, like you're actually becoming gods? No, that's not what we're saying. What we're saying is somehow, in a mysterious, beautiful, glorious, majestic way, each of us, if we follow Jesus, can partake and share in the very divine nature of God. It is a beautiful and glorious truth. And it's one we can each spend all of the rest of our lives trying to figure out, what does that actually mean? But it is good. And I want to say this just very clearly because it's exactly what Colossians 3 tells us. Following Jesus means we get to share in God's own glory. Yes, it takes very intentional, mindful, ongoing effort to follow Jesus. But it also means that we get to share in his glory. And that makes a difference for us. We're going to sing a song in just a moment. Micah's going to come back up. And again, just a shout out to how awesome Micah is. He hates when I do this, but I'm sorry, brother, I got to. Not only did he pick this up at the last minute, I said just yesterday, hey, is there any chance you could play a particular song to end it? And he's like, yeah, got it. He just did it. So if you have a chance, thank Micah yet before you leave today. But we're going to sing a song called Come Thou Fount. And it's a hymn. It's a song that might be a little older for some of us. Maybe you know it, maybe you don't. But one of the lines in the song says that we cry out to God to bind my wandering heart to him. That's where we say it takes this effort. It takes this intentionality, this pursuit. Because quite frankly, following Jesus means that I'm no longer the ultimate authority in my life. You have seen this every week. I keep putting this up because at the end of it, if Jesus is supreme, that means he's my ultimate authority. And it's easy for me to try to take that authority back and say, no, I'm the boss of me, right? It's so easy for me to say, well, I'm going to live by my truth. Now, you have a story, and that is yours, and I'm not invalidating that. But you do not have a truth that is different than the truth that is actual truth, that is Jesus. All truth has to come under the authority of Jesus. And if I am going to follow him, I must be under his authority. I must be willing, I must be ready. I must be actively saying, Jesus, not my will be done, but yours. And the thing is, he's not an evil taskmaster that wants to just have us scurrying around like little ants that he gets to burn their legs off with a magnifying glass. No. We serve a Father who loves us. We serve a Father who wants good for us, who wants good for all of his creation, and loves us and says, I know what's good for you. I know your heart better than you do. I made you. And if you pursue this, you will experience goodness in life more than you can possibly imagine. So I need to follow Jesus as the ultimate authority in my life. We need to ask him to bind our wandering hearts to him.